What are some downright disturbing facts you know? Only 1% of arsonists are convicted. Only 10% of arsons are even solved. I'd bet most are solved, but are unprovable. Hundreds of dead babies were found in the septic tank of a mother and baby home in Tuam, Ireland. No one has any idea how many children died under the system countrywide, or how many children were forcibly taken from their mothers and sold to childless families abroad. A lot of these babies' mothers were pressured into giving them up, either by the church for being single mothers, or by fathers who couldn't afford to feed the kids. Many were promised, when they were in better situations, they would be given their kids back. Lots of the children sold abroad were indentured servants. They weren't even adopted out of charity or to make up for parents not being able to have kids of their own. They were often made to work on farms and in factories. While still children, they could eventually potentially buy their freedom, provided they scraped up enough cash. For some, joining WW1 was an escape route from being a servant for life. Source: my great-grandfather was sold to a farm in Manitoba with his brother. They joined the war effort at 14 and 12 to escape it. Their mom was told the church home would care for them till she and her husband were on their feet again. They were sold within a year of arriving at the home, and it took up until I think the 50s or 60s for my great-grandfather and his brother to finally find their remaining family in Europe. My stepmom gave birth at 17 in a mother and baby home in the late 60s, which was run by Catholic nuns. She was one of the very rare ones who got to keep her baby. My stepbrother, who is now 54, she faced down untold stigma at home, but did it nevertheless. She was a very strong woman. Wow, I didn't know the homes were still a thing after WW2. She sounds incredible. The last mother and baby home in Ireland didn't close until 1998. By that stage they didn't have the same power, but it was frighteningly recent considering I was born to a single mother in 97. In the old days, poor people would sell their teeth to rich people. Like when the tooth fairy gave me money for my teeth. Imagine you lose your baby tooth then wake up later that night to find Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos fighting over who gets the tooth. Imagine seeing Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos opening their mouths and they are just packed full of baby teeth. Can somebody please Photoshop that? During World War II, Japan bombed China with fleas infected with the bubonic plague. They were about to do it to the USA as well. It was codenamed Operation Cherry Blossoms at Night and was planned to happen in September 1945, but the USA dropped 2 atomic bombs in August 1945, so the attack didn't happen. Never bring fleas to a nuclear weapon fight. Nuclear fleas enter the chat. Bubonic nukes enter the chat. Only 56 POWs from China were released by Japan during WW2. This thread had really revealed the horrors of WWII Japan. There is a reason they had to demilitarize after the war. I recently learned this, and maybe I'm stupid for not knowing already. The human has 2 anal sphincters. The first one we have no control over, but the second one of course we can control. When the stool comes through the first sphincter, the urge to go to the bathroom is felt like an airlock for poo. Ever thought about how whales and dolphins die when they get too old and too weak to swim up to the surface to breathe? They start to slowly sink towards the deep, cold depths of the ocean and suffocate in the dark. Interesting sidebar to this, the size thresholds for animals that die like this is studied in detail by engineers because their corpse will exist at such a high pressure that the carbon compounds they decomposed into will be heavier than water. This means that all the carbon they consume in their lives will be extracted from the atmosphere and stored in the ocean in a carbon pool. Encouraging the growth of the populations over this threshold is thought to be a key to reducing the CO2 in the atmosphere. I spent 100k on a master's and that's the only thing I remember. What a waste of money. You could have learned that on Reddit for free like I just did. Lobotomies were a complete guessing game and the procedure's success was mostly based on whether or not the patient was deemed calm and quiet post-surgery. Walter Freeman, the man who popularized lobotomies in America, wasn't even a surgeon. He had to partner with an actual surgeon to attempt the procedure. But Freeman didn't care for the length of the surgery, so he invented the ice pick lobotomy. Use an ice pick to access the brain. by hammering the pick through the bone above the eye and near the nose, and then just wiggling it around. As stated before, Freeman was not a surgeon, so when the actual surgeon he partnered with walked into their shared office to find Freeman with an ice pick halfway in a patient's brain, their partnership ended immediately. But that didn't stop Freeman from continuing his work with lobotomies. He toured the nation in a van he called the Lobotomobile, offering the procedure to insane asylums with problem patients. Freeman completed over 3,000 lobotomies throughout his career, of which nearly 500 patients died and 1,000 were left in a vegetative state. And on top of that, the only reason lobotomies stopped was the development of antipsychotic drugs, not because the procedure was banned. The USSR banned lobotomies before the US did. When filming Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory in Germany in 1970/1, they had trouble casting the Oompa Loompas, as people who suffered with disabilities were simply killed by the Nazis during the war. Till that movie was made in Germany, I would assume GB. The way they filmed in a very German town, but with British and American actors gives it a weird fairy tale vibe. The world's youngest confirmed mother was 5 years old. That's really messed up. In the 90s, a British Airways pilot was sucked out of the cockpit at 23,000 foot due to a poorly installed window seal failure, and he got pinned against the airplane as the flight attendants tried to keep him from completely getting sucked away. But he survived, suffering only a few bone fractures and frostbite. Pays to keep your seatbelt on. In the early hours of September 26, 1983, a false alarm at a Soviet bunker indicated the launch of multiple American nuclear missiles. Everyone in the bunker except for one man, Stanislav Petrov, thought it was a real attack, but Petrov correctly assumed that if the USA was to launch an attack, it would have been hundreds of bombs, leading him to not tell higher-ups, who likely would have ordered a counterattack, leading to nuclear war, about the missiles, likely saving billions of lives. TL. Doctor, we were a single person's decision away from a full-out nuclear war. We've been a single person's decision away from nuclear war several times. There was a malfunction on a radar dish in the Arctic which mistook the light of the moon for a massive middle strike. It was only because of a Canadian major who realized that Khrushchev was in New York, so a strike was highly unlikely. A scientific rocket launched from northern Norway almost caused WWII once. No one figured to tell the people on the other side of the border about it, and they promptly freaked out. But they figured that a single rocket was too little to be the opening volley of a first strike. The word mortgage comes from a French term that means death pledge, or a contract that only expires upon death. Where's our drowning machines? Those tiny dams you see on rivers are shaped like this, kinda under the water, and this shape causes a circular flow of water. As the water circulates, it gets aerated, lowering the density. So if you swim in one, not only are you trapped on the longest spin cycle, but you can't get out because the water isn't dense enough to swim in. Apparently they recommend that if you're caught in one, that to try and escape you should tuck your chin and curl into the fetal position with your arms wrapped around yourself to try and be caught by the current and pushed along the riverbed past the hydraulics of the Boyle line. When the German battleship Bismarck went down after hours of constant battering, 1,500 of the 2,000 men crew were able to jump into the ocean. The Royal Navy rescued 500 of them, but left early due to lack of fuel and the threat of submarines. Over 1,000 men were left on the ocean to die, having just survived pure hell. Today the area of the wreck is littered with thousands of leather boots, having once belonged to the crew which died because they were abandoned. The average age of the crew was little over 20 years. There's also the British battlecruiser HMS Hood, which was sunk by the Bismarck and had only 3 survivors out of a crew of 418. My grandfather was on the Hood. He was injured and taken off. Massive survivor's guilt there, because of course his whole team died. Obviously I wouldn't be here today if he hadn't been. I need to get a hold of his records and find out just how close his accident was to the final sailing. My dad served with Ted Briggs. Said he should never have been made an officer, was far too decent a human being. My grandfather was transferred off the Hood 2 weeks before it was sunk. Same with the survivor's guilt, but like you, I wouldn't be here today if he hadn't been. That killed my grandfather. He was on 3 ships that suck in Pacific. He survived and so many didn't. He became an alcoholic and drank himself to death before he was 54. Sudette sudden unexpected death in epilepsy. There's a small chance, 1/1,000 per year on average, that someone with epilepsy will just die during their sleep. There are a lot of theories, but no real reason for this has ever been found. Edit. Wow. This really blew up. I was expecting it to get buried beneath all of the other comments. I'm an epileptic like so many of you here. Hopefully this post will raise some awareness. I have epilepsy and just learned about this a few months ago. Makes sleeping more fun. Same boat. I've had nocturnal epilepsy since I can remember, but just lived with it. Never diagnosed. Never thought to go to the doctor. Even though the seizures meant I had to miss work and stuff, I just sort of managed it myself. In 2018, aged 33, I had my first ever grand mal seizure and hit my head pretty bad. That led to an official diagnosis and a very concerned epilepsy specialist repeatedly telling me about SUDEP and how I definitely should have sought diagnosis and medication sooner. I had no idea I could die from it, which sounds ridiculous now. But growing up I didn't have the internet, and by the time Google became a thing it was so normal to me that it wasn't even in my head to Google it. Good news is I've been practically seizure free on meds at work for at least a year now.